Good evening. From the nation's capital, welcome to the Kelly Wright Show. Your headlines in just a moment, but first, some opening observations. Today is Super Tuesday, and 14 states and one American territory will be voting in today's massive primary to show their support for the Democrat candidate they hope to soon crown with the party's nomination to run against President Donald Trump. Once again, we are hearing more and more about the significance of the black and brown vote. Former Vice President Joe Biden, fresh off his big win in the South Carolina primary, echoed once again that he is counting on black voters to be his rocket fuel in gaining the Democrat Party's presidential nomination. And while black voters overwhelmingly supported him in South Carolina, there are no guarantees that he will receive all the support he needs to win today's super primary. For that matter, there's no guarantee that Bernie Sanders can gain enough support among African Americans. This year's election is something that is very pivotal. The political landscape is less predictable. This year, with so much reflection on history, 55 years since the Selma to Montgomery March, which paved the way for the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and then this year in which we celebrate the passage of women's suffrage, which black women helped gain, and then the current issues that black Americans face, such as achieving more economic parity, more affordable health care, home ownership, and education. It is very clear that blacks are not voting for the traditional choices of the past. Black Americans are no longer willing to go along just to get along, only to have their concerns and dreams dashed after giving a candidate their precious vote and receiving diminished returns. Furthermore, do not rule out the Trump effect. While Democrats are stating Trump is causing more racial division and giving rise to white supremacy, and while he may have received just 8% of the black vote in 2016, he is making some gains surprisingly among black voters now due to some of the programs his administration has launched, such as support for historically black colleges and universities and criminal justice reform. The point is this: black voters are not all in for the Democrats, nor are they all in for the Republicans. They are, however, all in favor of being recognized and rewarded for the great achievements and contributions they have made to America. And they are standing up and demanding now that Democratic contenders, as well as the president, not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. Black voters today are demanding, do not take us for granted. And those are my opening observations. And now your headlines. A tornado touched down in Nashville overnight. More than 40 buildings were destroyed and thousands are without power. The metro Nashville area opened emergency shelters to help people there. Tennessee is one of the states scheduled to vote in today's Super Tuesday. The polls will remain open. It is Super Tuesday. The Democratic primary is being shaken up dramatically. Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota dropped out last night, joining former Mayor Pete Buttigieg and billionaire businessman Tom Steyer. A third of the delegates are up for grabs now. The number of deaths from coronavirus continues to rise dramatically here in the U.S. There are confirmed cases in at least 14 states. Officials believe the virus has been circulating here for weeks now, and this may be just the beginning of a massive outbreak. But the Trump administration says there is no need to worry.
What the president has told us to do on the task force, what he did when he initiated the suspension of all travel from China, the quarantining effort, is we're leaning into this effort. It's all hands on deck, because our effort here is to do everything possible to prevent the spread of the coronavirus.
Coronavirus fears have prompted people to stock up on supplies, which is causing shortages in stores around the world. And that's a look at your day's top headlines. We'll have much more for you after the break. Welcome back. We've been talking about the coronavirus. Washington State is the epicenter of the coronavirus here in the United States right now. Dr. Joseph Castleberry joins us from Kirkland, Washington. He's the president of Northwest University. Doc, good of you to join us today. And what are you doing as president of a university to help people there in Kirkland where we've seen the death toll rise due to the coronavirus?
Well, thank you for having me on the show, Dr. Wright. And this is a very sad day for us in Washington because of the 6 people who've passed away because of the coronavirus disease. Here at Northwest, we're doing, first of all, everything we can to make sure that everyone is safe, that everyone's preserving their health, that we're fighting the contagion as much as possible. But beyond that, what we're trying to do is make sure that no one is living in fear. Northwest is a Christian university, and it's an essential tenet of our faith that we're not supposed to live in fear. The Bible tells us in 2 Timothy 1:7 that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love and of power and of a sound mind. And we just don't have the right to live in fear. So we're teaching people to be confident, to trust in God, and to take advantage of every moment, to be aware of God's presence and to praise God.
That's actually a very interesting take because a lot of times we hear about the fear factor as it relates to coronavirus and people running out and actually storming stores to get masks and to do all kinds of other things. And that would suggest that there's a lot of fear out there. But what you're doing is bringing a lot of, I think, thought, and you're allaying the fears to say, yeah, we've got this situation. We've had 6 deaths in our town, but we can still reach out to the community, embrace them with some faith and some hope and the possibility of using, as you stated, that sound mind to find a sound cure or a vaccine to actually stop the spread of this disease.
It's true. The vast majority of people who contract the disease will never even know they had it. 80% will have very light cases. Some will have no symptoms at all. It's not, unless you are immunocompromised or elderly, you don't have that much to fear. It'll be like a bad cold or a case of flu or something like that, or nothing at all. So it doesn't make sense to get too upset. You know, we put out a thing. It's made a lot of folks chuckle, but we meant it seriously. When you wash your hands, instead of singing happy birthday twice, we're asking people to sing the doxology. So make sure that you wash your hands for 20 seconds and get a good solid hygienic wash. And while you're praising God, it's hard to be too anxious.
I like the fact that you're so unapologetic with your faith, and of course that's what Northwest University students do. But the point is, you're one of the leading colleges in the country among small colleges, and you're actually there doing a lot of good in your community. I've seen you help the homeless, and now I'm seeing you help the sick, and not being afraid to go out and do that. And I think we should be at a time, because of the heightened fear and awareness of the coronavirus, that we not give way to being racially prejudiced towards people of Asian descent, but actually reach out and embrace them and help them in any way that we can. Of course, practicing the safeguards to which you talked about, washing your hands, coughing in your elbow, things of that nature. So what are the students saying to you about how can they help?
Well, students are mostly worried about how they can stay free from disease. But we're encouraging them to take this opportunity to be kind to people, especially we have a lot of Chinese students here at Northwest, a lot of Asian people in our area. We've put out the word to everyone that ethnicity has nothing to do with being contagious, and no one should be mistreated because they're wearing a mask. A lot of people are, wearing the mask because they're afraid. The masks don't really do any good, but when people are afraid, they look for anything. And some people will see that person with a mask on and be afraid of them. No need to do that. Having a mask doesn't make you more contagious. It just means you're more concerned. But we're urging our students to be kind to people, to serve people where they can, and look to others. Because if you keep your mind on yourself, that's a good recipe for getting too anxious.
And are you in touch with any of the health officials there in Kirkland and throughout the state, for that matter? Have they reached out to you to give you any advice about what you should be doing on campus? I know that in some areas schools have actually shut down due to the threat of the coronavirus. That may not be happening out there, but it certainly has happened in China and other places.
Well, we're being very proactive, and we didn't wait on public health to call us. We called them, and we're keeping them updated on anything that happens. We've not had a confirmed case of virus here on campus, but we're staying in touch with the health department, and we're following all of their guidelines. They're not asking schools to close. A few schools have preemptively and in an abundance of caution have closed, but we're trying to keep a spirit of normality going on here. And in the long run, normality is going to break out. This virus is not going to affect the great majority of people, and we need to keep real life moving along here.
Right. Dr. Joseph Castleberry, president of Northwest University, always a pleasure to talk to you, my friend, and thanks for your comments about this. I think you gave us a nice, good take on this, even though we're dealing with a very bad and ugly disease right now. Dr. Joseph Castleberry from Kirkland, Washington, Northwest University, thanks again.
God bless you, Dr. Wright.
Thank you. God bless you as well. We'll be right back with more after this. Don't go nowhere. Welcome back. Well, California is a delegate-rich state which Senator Bernie Sanders is favored to win. Duncan McKenzie McHarg is on the ground in Los Angeles for us to get a sense of what people are thinking there.
Bernie Sanders is calling for a political revolution, and there are plenty of people on board in the state of California.
I feel like he actually genuinely means what he says when he says he wants to help us.
There's literally pictures of him being like drugged by police during the civil rights movement. Like, there's people during that time period who are running now that were on the opposite side of that.
Among his policies of Medicare for All, wiping out $2.2 trillion of student debt and recognising climate change as the biggest threat to national security, Sanders is targeting issues that historically have been important to African Americans and Hispanics.
Fair housing, a level playing field, getting rid of mass incarceration.
Rival Joe Biden has found renewed energy for his campaign after a victory in Saturday's primary in South Carolina.
The days of Donald Trump's divisiveness will soon be over. No.
And now billionaire Mike Bloomberg is officially entering the race, spending more than $215 million on advertising in the 14 states up for grabs on Super Tuesday.
That history, Black history, is American history, and we must always tell these stories this month and every month.
Los Angeles sits in one of the most ethnically diverse counties in the country, and here in East LA, 96% of the population is Latino. With President Donald Trump tightening up immigration at the border, many in this neighborhood want anyone but him. The Latino vote is a big deal here in California. In fact, it accounts for nearly 40% of the population. Sanders has shown that he's the favourite amongst Hispanics, particularly Mexican Americans, with great results so far in Iowa, New Hampshire and Nevada.
If you think about what Martin Luther King was doing, what he was fighting for, Bernie Sanders is fighting for the same thing.
A fight that still has a long way to go.
Thanks, Duncan. Well, the next guests who join me are Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeaver and Malik Abdul. They're here to talk about what's happening in play and what's at stake during the Super Tuesday. Ladies and gents, this is a big day. It's Super Tuesday. Everybody's been talking about it before Iowa,
yes,
before New Hampshire,
yes,
and certainly after South Carolina. What do you anticipate, Doctor?
This is going to be, this is one of those situations where this is really a up in the air opportunity. Because prior to South Carolina, it really looked like Bernie was going to completely run away with it.
It did, it did.
But the entire trajectory of this race has now changed. I expect that Biden is going to come in strong tonight. I think Bloomberg is going to fizzle, and I think Bernie will actually do quite well, particularly in Texas and California. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Particularly in Texas and California, you say. Malik, is that due to the Latino vote?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little different than South Carolina. I think that in South Carolina, well, who was that? Terry McMillan. Black people were the interruption of everything in South Carolina. With considering how well Bernie did in Nevada, I expect him to do well in Texas and in California. The question will be, of course, is whether or not who gets over that 15% threshold. I really think that moving forward, it's a Biden Bernie race. I don't expect we were talking before we came in that I really expect Bloomberg to be a dud after Super Tuesday, so I don't expect anything from him. So I really think we're going to be looking at Biden and Bernie Sanders, and at some point, maybe this week, Elizabeth Warren is going to drop out too.
Well, interesting that you say that because she has vowed to stay in all the way to the end. What's going on with Senator Elizabeth Warren? Why would she try to stay in when she's gained no traction at all?
That's a very good question. She's looking to be very strategic here.
For who, though?
For herself. Okay.
All right. I'm just loving the way you break it down. I was thinking it. You said it.
She wants to be the consensus candidate. She's hoping that if this thing does go to the convention, that she can say, hey, I'm a little progressive, I'm a little centrist, you know, maybe I'm the one who should get your vote.
Vying for
the presidential bid. Absolutely.
And if failing
or at
in that,
least a vice
a
presidential
VP slot.
opportunity.
But wouldn't that more likely go to an African-American woman?
I'm not exactly sure. I think that, and I don't know who that perfect candidate is. The ones that they've been talking about so far, of course, is Kamala Harris and Stacey Abrams. I'm not sure as far as their reach, what the Joe Biden or whomever wins the nomination on the Democratic side will win California, irrespective of who they have as a vice president. So I'm not sure if Kamala Harris can actually bring, you know, she can't deliver California in a way that any candidate, other candidate couldn't. And we were talking before the show about Stacey Abrams, and I'm not sure about Stacey Abrams, but I do think that it will have to be some minority.
And yeah, I was just going to say, but the push for a black woman on the ticket is basically a push that recognizes the fact that black women really are the backbone of the Democratic Party. So it really is about having a way of having a bit of inspiration for turnout and overperformance of the core base of the Democratic Party come November.
And the point is, if they go with that type of choice, a choice of choosing someone like a Stacey Abrams, who nearly won Georgia, many people looking back in hindsight say that she should have won that state and become the first black female to become a governor of the state. She didn't. But she's still looming large among black American women.
Absolutely.
And that would bring out a vote that many people actually would love to have, including the president.
Yes. I mean, Joe Biden, if he were to get the nomination, for example, people like Joe, but he's not the most inspiring, right? You know, so, you know, they would need a little bit of star power, I think, on that ticket to help him.
Well, look, hold this thought. We want to come back and talk a little bit more about this and about the Bernie factor. And then we also want to talk about the man who sits in the Oval Office right now. Coming back with more right after this. And welcome back. I'm here with Dr. Avis DeWeaver and Malik Abdul, and we're talking about the Super Tuesday and the strategy moving ahead. So we've talked about Joe Biden, we've talked about Elizabeth Warren. Let's talk about the Bernie Sanders factor. We did say, or you did say, that you think he'll do strong in Texas and California. Yeah. But what does he have to do to get beyond the socialism moniker?
I don't think he can. This is something, if you listen to Bernie, he owns it. He doesn't shy away from the fact that he's a democratic socialist, as he calls himself. So I don't think that he can move away from it at all. I think the interesting thing will be what happens if Bernie Sanders does not ultimately become the nominee. And I think what we're seeing with some of this, seems like there's an effort of coalescing around Joe Biden. And I think at a minimum, his core supporters, you know, the ones who are really about Bernie and Bernie's personality, whether or not they would ultimately come out in November in strong numbers to defeat Donald Trump, that's something I'm not sure about.
Dr. DeWeaver, we heard, you were talking about Donald Trump, we heard last night Vice President Joe Biden come out and say we have to take down the Trump administration because the president has been a divider more than a uniter, and he wants to seek to unite people. Do you think the President of the United States is watching all of this and perhaps getting his talking points and getting his program together, or will he continue to tweet? What do you think is going to happen?
He ain't changing. He's not changing. But he is watching all this. It's very interesting to see his reaction to all this, because if you notice his Twitter feed, he never directly attacks Bernie Sanders, right? He is, in fact, he's sort of egging on Bernie's supporters by tweeting about the fact, oh, they're trying to stick it to Bernie, they're rigging it. He really wants to run against Bernie Sanders, and that's very, very transparent if you look at actually what he's saying on his Twitter feed.
All right, Malik?
Bernie Sanders is a much easier candidate for Donald Trump not just to run against, but ultimately beat. I think that Joe Biden does represent a tougher climb, if you will. I still think that Donald Trump will beat Joe Biden, but as far as Bernie is concerned, I think that, well, and I don't think, the president knows what he's doing. He's very good at this. So if you see him pushing this, and as someone who voted for Bernie in the primary myself, you know, I can see Donald Trump's strategy, and he's hoping that Bernie Sanders, he can paint him as a socialist. He can paint him, you know, these radical policies. So all of these great things that he's saying about Donald Trump and these, Bernie Sanders, and these overtures that he's making to his supporters, all of that will be forgotten if he ultimately ends up being the nominee.
You're saying forgotten, and many times blacks and browns are viewed as the forgotten, and yet they're looked upon as being the most pivotal vote in America this year.
Yes.
There was one gentleman who stated that black voters will be the heroes of this campaign. Having said that, with the likelihood that President Trump could repeat 4 years, that let's just say that that's
Jesus
the elephant
Christ,
in the room.
Really? Do we have to say that?
You have one or two scenarios here. So from a Democrat perspective, what are Democrats saying about that? Because let's face it, blacks are not monolithic.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
You've got some who vote on the left for Democrats. You have some who vote on the right for Republicans, and there seems to be some support out there that's building.
There is, and I would say that to his credit, the Trump campaign is making a very specific effort to attract the black vote. And that's what he's supposed to do, right? He's running for president. He's supposed to. He's very overt about that. But he's doing it in a much more aggressive way than we normally see Republican candidates do that. So I just want to acknowledge that.
Does that surprise you?
It does surprise me, but I also think it's very strategic. And he understands the power and the importance of the black vote. I would argue sometimes even more directly than some members of the Democratic Party understands the power of the black vote.
Malik, at the top of the show, I talked about the importance of the black vote and basically stated, do not take the black vote for granted. In other words, don't promise them things and then not deliver the rewards based upon them choosing to vote for you. The President of the United States has to face this as well.
Yeah. Donald Trump's problem, and I've said it on this show before, Donald Trump has a messaging and a tweeting problem. As far as his policies, you can debate, you can have healthy debates about his policies and to what extent they help the black community, but he's able to do things, to his credit, he's able to do things that, for instance, Barack Obama could not. And that he has no reservations, no apprehensions about it, and he's very in your face. And I think that's something that will ultimately benefit him, because we can have these larger discussions about what it is that he's doing. So I expect him to continue down this road. They're opening up the locations around the country, the Black Voices for Trump locations around the country. But I think that this is a good barometer. This is a good gauge for future candidates and how to engage in the black community. I just wish you would stop tweeting as much.
Malik Abdul and Dr. Avis DeWeaver, I love you both so much. Come on the show anytime. And obviously you'll be on quite a bit because we have a lot of campaigning to do beyond Super Tuesday.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens
Absolutely.
tonight. After tonight, we'll know exactly who's going to be out there on the front lines and being the front runner, perhaps going into the Democratic convention and getting that nomination.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Back with more of the Kelly Wright Show right after this. Welcome back to the Kelly Wright Show. Let's talk about the economy and how it relates to African Americans. The Black Economic Alliance supports candidates who support an agenda that helps the economic development of African American communities. And that's a good thing. Here to talk about that is David Clooney. He is the new executive director of the organization and joins us now to talk about this wonderful alliance. And first of all, congratulations on becoming the director of it.
Thank you, Kelly.
Now, you bring a lot of background from having served under the Obama administration. In what role did you play then in terms of generating more of a good economic base and growth for African Americans?
Sure. So during the Obama administration, I began as a lawyer at the White House, and then I moved to the Treasury Department, first under Secretary Geithner and then under Secretary Jacob Lew. And I was in the front office, and we were working on a number of issues like access to capital, community development, affordable housing, a number of things that helped really create a pipeline to wealth creation for the Black community as well as other underserved and other underrepresented communities. And then I went to JP Chase, where I was working in corporate responsibility and government relations, working with elected officials, trying to create solutions for, again, underserved communities, particularly the Black community.
And what's the role you're playing now?
So just as of this morning, breaking news with you, I am the executive director of the Black Economic Alliance. I just started today, and I am leading the organization that was started a little over 2 years ago now. After the 2016 election, a number of business leaders came together and said we need to harness the collective vote as well as the power of our dollars and political influence to make sure that we have a voice for the Black community. So the Black Economic Alliance is the first and really only organization of its kind. It is a coalition of business leaders and aligned advocates who really work for the progress and prosperity of the Black community all around work, wages, and wealth. So it is really exciting to be here in my first official act.
Well, first of all, I got to give you some congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
Okay,
Thank
all right.
you. I appreciate
That's important because that's quite a feat and it's quite a task that you have at hand. Let's talk about the current status of African Americans as it relates to our growth economically. Where do they stand? And we can always afford to be stronger and grow greater with it.
Indeed. So we know that while we have been seeing a significant amount of economic progress in the greater economy, particularly since the Great Recession, as we call it, the economic downturn of almost 10 years or over 10 years ago now, the Black community really has not seen the same success in the way of unemployment, access to capital, home ownership, pathways to jobs. So the Black Economic Alliance is all really solely focused on both public policy and holding political candidates and incumbents accountable to not only, there's a phenomenon that we're all very familiar with, particularly on the heels of South Carolina this past Saturday, where elected officials will come to the Black community, to churches, to civil rights organizations, to business leaders, to donors and others, and really talk about how important the Black vote and Black issues are in the lead up to an election. Our job at the Black Economic Alliance is to make our issues and Black prosperity, economic prosperity, a paramount issue for candidates throughout the tenure of their time in office and not just the weeks and months leading up to an election.
I'm so glad you're saying that because we talk about that all the time here on the show. We talk about the fact that you court our vote, and in many cases you invite us to the party, but then you don't dance with us.
That's right.
Even after we've committed that vote to you to support you. And we're talking about things you can put on the kitchen table so that Black Americans and their families can lead their families to economic parity.
That's right.
Having said that, what candidate are you in support of right now? You know, the Trump administration touts the fact that it has a low unemployment rate with African Americans, that they've helped enhance the quality or the funding of HBCUs. But where do we get to the forgotten community and the underserved communities to really have a candidate who will say, not only do I know your plight, but I'm engaged in actively doing something about it?
So in the presidential election, we are early, although it feels like we've been living this experience for a long time. We're early in the process in that over 40% of the delegates will be elected or will be awarded in the next few days. So the Black Economic Alliance is really watching very closely and making sure, instead of endorsing any particular candidate right now, our primary goal is to make sure that every candidate, both in the presidential election and really all the way up and down the ballot, is prioritizing Black economic progress and talking in very specific and deliberate terms about what their plans are for black economic progress and black economic plans?
I actually welcome that kind of response because I think it's wisdom. I think it has to be a bipartisan approach to improving our economic vitality overall in this country. But as it narrows to the focus of African Americans, there has to be something on the Republican side and the Democrat side. You know, one size does not fit all, and one side does not represent all. We have to get both parties in alignment with the needs of the African American community. So with your alliance, how can you best educate the president? How can you best educate the Democratic contender? How can you better educate all of Congress to step up and do the right thing, not just the Congressional Black Caucus, but all members of Congress?
Right. I appreciate you asking that question. It gives me an opportunity to make sure I make clear the Black Economic Alliance is a nonpartisan organization. We are focused on working with everybody who is in office, who is seeking office, to make sure that they're prioritizing our issues. And when folks are in office and we're working on moving public policy, we need to have folks on both sides of the aisle prioritizing our issues, looking at how they affect folks in rural communities, urban communities, red states, blue states alike. So we are focused on working with anybody who is in office, in the executive branch, in the legislative branch, and making sure that they understand why it is important to not only the black community, but to the greater economy that the black community do well. So for example, entrepreneurship, you have, while overall entrepreneurship is down in the black community, entrepreneurship is up 34%. And we know that when I was at JP Morgan Chase, for example, entrepreneurship we knew was one of the greatest drivers of local economies. In a place like Detroit, for example, that so needs economic stimulus, the vast majority of small business owners are black. So if the black community does well, the greater economy does well, and that's true for not only the U.S. economy, but the global economy.
David, you got me smiling because everything you're saying is right on the point and right on the money. Since we're talking about money, you got to come back.
I would love to come back.
Please come back, and I wish you the best with what you're doing. This is so needed, especially for a time like this, not just looking at the campaign trail, but looking at the future of our economy.
Indeed.
As it relates to small businesses, and of course the African American can help lead the way and be a pioneer and trailblazer to help all Americans. Thank
Absolutely.
you, and congratulations again.
Thank you very much.
He's David Clooney, Economic Black Alliance. We're going to be
Black
following
Economic Alliance.
Thank you for the correction.
Indeed.
And we look forward to you coming back.
Thanks
anytime.
for having me, Kelly.
You're always welcome to the Kelly Wright Show.
Thanks very much.
Back with more in a moment. Welcome back. They say energy is the new frontier, and it's here among us. Renewable energy is one of the fastest growing industry sectors in the U.S. Access to renewable energy is still harder in urban and low-income communities, but the job market for renewable energy, well, it's booming, and something that African Americans should look at very closely. Damali Rhett-Harding is the director of Oracle O-Power, and here to talk to us about it, about renewable energy. Good for you to join us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited you're here too, because energy, as I mentioned, is kind of like the new gold standard, if you will, for growth. And how did you get involved in energy?
That's a great story. So I, in graduate school, had the opportunity to do a market entry project as part of my course studies. And I got to go down to the Caribbean for 3 weeks. And we really did a market analysis of what was available from an energy perspective. So you look at a country like Barbados, which pays 5 times what we have in the US, and 90% of it is coming from diesel. And you compare that to a country like Costa Rica, which has 90% hydropower and is paying about half of what we pay in the US. And so that got me really fascinated about what's going on in the US. What does it mean to have, power generation from coal or from natural gas? And so my first job, I was able to work for a utility.
Wow. Now, what about those jobs that are available to African Americans? Are we looking at that sector, into the energy sector, enough? Shouldn't we give it more scrutiny and say we need to get in there because there's opportunity there?
There's fantastic opportunities there, and I think there are multiple ways and avenues for people to come into. So I'm a big proponent anytime I can speak on jobs in the energy sector. So you take Philadelphia, for example. They created an energy authority that actually is tasked with creating 10,000 clean energy jobs in the Philadelphia area. And specifically, they're looking at at-risk populations. And so a city like Philly, it's fantastic. So a city like Philly, they're looking at high school dropouts. They're looking at people who are coming back from prisons who can do work installing, maintenance, doing work in terms of thinking about, working in power generation and doing it specifically in their communities.
Oh, wait a minute, let's drill down a little bit more, Damali, because you're saying at risk. People who have dropped out of school, perhaps not having any idea of what they're going to do with their career. How do you help train them and help them get into the energy sector? What kind of jobs are available to them?
So I love the Philadelphia Energy Authority, so I'm happy to talk about it. So they actually go into the communities in Philadelphia and they actually create training programs. And so there are actually solar installations that are based in Philadelphia and the surrounding communities, and they hold cohorts and people apply and they actually ask for people to come. They train them, they take them on jobs, and then they actually have a program to counterbalance that where they're providing financing and mechanisms for low to moderate people to get solar installed on their rooftops. So now you have both created the demand as well as the supply.
And how much are those jobs paying? Give me a roundabout ballpark figure.
Definitely within higher than your entry level, so higher than more than double minimum wage. And so if you look at the average, salaries for solar and wind, they're well into, the 40s and 50s. And these are in urban areas, in rural areas. Wind farms are, if you look at where the wind belt is in the United States, it's in the middle of the country. Nobody's putting wind farms in downtown DC, but if you drive out to Virginia, you drive out to West Virginia, those jobs are going to be long-term and consistent, because once that wind farm is there, even if it needs maintenance, even if it needs replacement, you're going to need trained, skilled technicians to do that work.
I hear opportunity knocking. Opportunity is knocking on the doors of African American students and those who feel like they're not going to be able to get beyond minimum wage, or those who feel that they can't get an adequate education that would provide them with an adequate means of living. So tell me, for those who have a more promising future in energy, what kind of skill sets do they need to get in college or even a trade?
So I'll specifically focus on trade, because I think, for college graduates, the energy sector provides everything from your general accounting to strategy to looking at global policy and energy. But for those who have a trade, all you need is an associate's. And so I'll give, even for traditional utilities, we actually have a severe shortage of those utility linemen that we grew up with, seeing the linemen on the pole. They get paid very, very well. And we're now facing a nationwide critical shortage of linemen. And so that's a perfect opportunity where utilities are actually sponsoring people to get their associate's degree, come in, do the apprenticeship, and now you have a job that's going to offer you full benefits, the ability to be home with your family, and know that when you're doing something, when the storm's out, you're the first person that they're going to call.
Damali, you got to come back, because we could talk a lot about environmental racism and how the energy impacts that. So please come back to the Kelly Wright Show.
Yes, I have so much more to talk
We have a lot more to talk about. And it's really good, because as we talked about, energy is the new frontier, and it's working and it's providing jobs and opportunities regardless of the color of their skin.
Absolutely.
It's what you can do, what you can bring to the table, and you're bringing a lot to the table with informing us. Damali Rhett Harding.
Yes.
I got that right?
Yes,
okay.
you did.
We'll be back with a lot more here on the Kelly Wright Show. Love having Damali here with us.
Thank you.
Energy is the king. All right, back with a lot more. Welcome back. My next guest is Sean Perry. He is the host of the Senior Zone. Now, that's a weekly radio program dedicated to serving seniors. And for the past 7 years, he has worked tirelessly to promote and champion senior causes. Welcome to the program, Sean.
It's a pleasure to be here, Kelly.
First of all, you don't look senior. You look very healthy, very fit. But why did you start the Senior Zone?
Well, first of all, tell my back that it's not senior, okay? but I started the Senior Zone working for other corporate entities, if you will, and I saw a gap in communication between well-intended organizations that were striving to reach a population that I saw was also underserved. Hence, the birth of the Senior Zone was formed, just to add my 2 cents to that equation to bring solutions to problems that I saw.
You know, you remind me of something that my mother went through when she was a senior. She found it difficult to be recognized by her peers and her bosses. They kind of marginalized her after she reached a certain age. Do you encounter that with other senior citizens?
Well, from what I've learned and the guests that I've had, you know, on the Senior Zone, age discrimination is real and it's prevalent. And so what she was experiencing is not uncommon in the senior community.
And who are your listeners? I mean, I'm sure you're getting a mix of listeners, not just seniors.
Oh, we have, the listeners cover the gamut, you know, so we have the 80 plus, you know, the Miss Hattie Mays and the Mr. Jimmy Joneses of the world, but we also have those individuals that are sandwiched, providing care for their family, their children, right? So those caregivers of our older adults, they make up a huge percentage of my listener base, because that's information that we share each broadcast that they can benefit from and utilize in their life as they're providing care for their loved ones.
So for the benefit of our viewers who are watching this, because they get sandwiched as well, they're taking care of their children or their children's children who have moved in, and they're taking care of their parents who are older. That's a tough place to be. What do you do, or how do you help them navigate through that?
And that's a good word, and that's the word that we use most commonly on the Senior Zone, and that's how do you navigate? You know, how do you find balance between, you know, your priorities, your immediate family, right? And then, you know, the one that provided, you know, substance and life for you growing up, right? Your parents, your loved ones. And so we have resources. I'm a traffic cop, if you will, on the Senior Zone. And so we just direct them to the appropriate agencies, provide them with the tools and resources that we think can benefit and improve their lives, and let the rest, you know, unfold that way.
Sean Perry, the organizer, the creator, and the announcer, the radio guru of senior living. It's called the Senior Zone, and thank you for joining us today on the
Thank you very much for this opportunity, Kelly.
You're welcome anytime, man.
Thank you.
All right, keep looking sharp.
Thank
All
you.
right, back with more after this. And now for my final word. At the top of the show, we talked about the important black vote, and essentially the Democrats are contending to get into the Oval Office that you see behind me there. The White House is the prize, either for President Trump or whoever will become the Democratic nominee. But here's the bottom line. As a nation, we have to stand together as a people who are for the people and by the people, which means we should always be demanding of our government leaders to address that and to be intimately involved with each and every one of us, because at the end of the day, all lives matter. Hopefully in today's show, you've been righted and ignited and united to keep spreading some love, freedom, and peace. We leave you now with a song called Savior. In times like these, we probably need one. Peace out.
Please come and give us forgiveness. Well, it's just too little. You know we need it now. There's too little. In times like these, do you ever wonder, could it be we could it be? We Lord, we need a Savior.